Hi everyone, my name is Emma Condon and today I'm going to be talking about a topic that is extremely important for us as teachers to be aware of so we can make sure that we're addressing this properly in our classrooms. So today I'm going to be talking about the stolen generations, Aboriginal culture and sense of belonging, and how this community has been impacted by this tragic event and what we can do in our education system and classrooms to ensure that we're addressing this properly. So a lot of people may know some generic information of what occurred during this period. However, for the people who lived through it or had family members affected by it, the actual details and impact will be significantly more important, as will be our reaction and therefore the way we educate our students about it. So the stolen generations occurred from 1910 all the way to the 1970s. So this is a really long time. And this was where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were torn away from their families and put into foster homes, institutions, or adopted by Caucasian families. And this was to learn how to be civilised according to a prominent society. This horrible act occurred because it was made an Australian government policy, along with many other policies that almost controlled every aspect of an Indigenous person's life. That's by the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, 2018. The children who were part of the stolen generations were taught to forget their culture, families, language, and even their names in order to conform and fit into their new lives. However, many children were still neglected or abused by the institution or foster families as they were not seen as equal. This was by Australians Together 2019. So why did the Australian government create this policy? So dating back to 1869, the Aborigines Protection Act was created in Victoria, which gave a legal power to the governor to order the removal of any Indigenous child. This meant that the governor could order the removal of any Aboriginal child from their family and be sent to an institution, as it was thought to be in the best interest of the child. In the best interest of the child often meant that they thought that the child was being neglected in their eyes. So in 1915, it was passed by the New South Wales government that the Aboriginal Protection Board could separate any child from their family without actually having to prove to the court that they weren't being neglected either. So the Australian government at the time thought that they were somehow protecting the Aboriginal community and the children, and ultimately incorporate the population into the dominant culture. So the ongoing cycle of damage, this damage is inexcusable, and has left a severe impact in today's society still. So this was the Australian Human Rights Commission 2008. So this past event had a huge impact on Indigenous Australians today. Cultural identities have been lost due to family ties being broken and connection to Indigenous lands, language and spirituality forgotten. So Australian Institute of Torres Strait Islander Studies 2018. So not only this, but as many children of the stolen generation were forced to reject their culture, this led to feelings of being ashamed of their background, who they are, and created an overall feeling of not belonging. So Williams-Moseley from Price, 2012. The loss of culture, belonging and family has led to psychological and emotional damage for both children who were removed from their community, removed from their families, as well as the communities who suffered their loss. Social and survival skills were hindered, causing limited education, unemployment and poverty. This in turn has led to some Indigenous Australians turning to self-harm, substance abuse and antisocial behaviour. Williams-Moseley from Price, 2012. The realisation of this ripple effect, however, took years to determine, prolonging any actions that could be undertaken by the Australian government to improve the situation. So it was only determined in 1997 by the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission that the removal of Indigenous children from their families had lifelong impacts on Indigenous communities. So this was discovered through a national inquiry called the Stolen Generations Bringing Them Home report. The next steps for healing the wounds would be an apology from the Australian government acknowledging what they had done. However, this only occurred in 2008, so many years later. This apology was said by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and he made a formal apology to the stolen generations and was able to begin paving the way to reconciliation. Reconciliation encourages the acknowledgement of history, both the good and the bad, a commitment to social justice for Indigenous cultures, and rebuilding the relationship to move forward in collaboration. Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, 1997. So, however, to many, this apology is still hollow as it does not bring back the bonds and relationships to those who were lost. So from this information, it is clear that this event has had a ripple effect even in the 21st century. This is why us as educators need to be aware of how to approach this in the classroom and how to teach these events appropriately. So the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority has ensured that Australian children will learn, understand and acknowledge the value traditional Indigenous Australian culture has had on our community. They will also learn and respect the history that has occurred. So Indigenous education has now become a compulsory part of the curriculum, so we need to know how to teach it properly. We also need to ensure that we are accurate with our information to cater for students who may be of Indigenous descent. Harrison and Greenfield, 2011, state that many teachers do not feel equipped to teach Aboriginal education in their classroom and can often lead to teaching only stereotypes, as a teacher's knowledge of Aboriginal culture and feelings of empathy is limited. A further dilemma that there can be hidden biases in the way we teach our Indigenous education, often known as curriculum bias. That was determined by German Sparks, 1989. So a lot of Aboriginal cultures and history that is taught by non-Indigenous teachers from the perspectives of the Caucasian community rather than from the perspectives of the Indigenous communities. O'Dowd, 2010. On one hand, this is going to be difficult to alter as there are less than 3% of Indigenous teachers in Australian primary schools, according to the census in 2011. So teaching from this perspective for non-Indigenous teachers is going to be challenging as they have not experienced this themselves, and the lack of Indigenous teachers may continue this cycle. Australian Council of Deans of Education, 2017. These issues need to be considered particularly for challenging topics such as the stolen generations and how culture and feelings of belonging were lost. We need to ensure that we are not teaching inaccurate information and are fully respecting the Aboriginal community. So how does the event of the stolen generations contribute to deeper understanding about teaching and learning with Indigenous cultures? So because of this event, rich and valuable cultural information has been lost, as well as understanding how deeply rooted the connections to culture and belonging are to to Indigenous communities. Australians Together, 2016. This significant knowledge has not only been denied by Indigenous Australians, but to non-Indigenous as well. Therefore, it affects all Australians. We are now beginning to learn the value of this information and the opportunities it presents to our education and future generations. Mackay, 2009. Ensuring that we build respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities and changing the way that we understand one another and the values of our nation, we can share in the knowledge that Indigenous communities hold. Mackay, 2009. So in order to show that we are respecting the Aboriginal community appropriately within our classroom and in the wider community, teachers need to be ensuring they're using the correct language. For example, talking about people in present tense rather than past tense. Harrison and Greenfield. Schools should be acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, which is occurring in most schools now. And they also need to be ensuring that they are discussing and recognising the backgrounds of Aboriginal students or Torres Strait Islander students and where they may have lived previously. Finally, teachers should be taking on wider research to learn about Aboriginal culture for their knowledge, for both their knowledge and the students. Mackay 2009. Speaking to local Aboriginal communities or looking up valid documentation is a great way of doing this. So to finish up, I'm going to be discussing an important question. So if in a school, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures are only celebrated during NAIDOT Week, Mabo Day or National Reconciliation Week, by having students do dot painting or having local communities members teaching dance or painting children's faces, does this teach students and the community about contemporary life? This poses an interesting question as, of course, these are all extremely significant events and are important in Indigenous culture and history. However, the way these events are being taught through dot painting, dance, or painting children's faces is a way of trivialising these events and can be known as tourist curriculum. Derman Sparks, 1989. Tourist curriculum teaches students about different cultures, often through traditional celebrations, food, dance, clothing, etc. However, this style of teaching and curriculum often does not address the culture properly, does not accurately portray accurate representation of their history and how they have lived in their daily lives. Derman Sparks, 1989. It also denies students of rich, authentic learning, as this curriculum is generally based on the perspectives of Caucasian cultures and can be quite generalising of other cultures. It is extremely important that educators do not trivialise Aboriginal culture and history, particularly when it comes to topics such as the stolen generations. We need to make sure that we are accurately reflecting the Indigenous community and history, as it only denies the Australian community of further knowledge and truths. So the take-home message: correctly educating our students about what occurred historically in the stolen generations is necessary, as it shows respect for our history. Even if it does not paint the events that occurred in a positive light, we must, when educating our students, be prepared to be accurate, empathic and respectful in order to provide perspective for the students. This will allow them to grow and acknowledge the cultural significance of Australia's Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.